Dr. Lydia Bean, Democratic candidate for the 6th Congressional District here in North Texas. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really just wanted to start by asking, why are you running?
I'm sorry, those are my dogs.
That's okay.
uh, Jack, I'm a longtime community leader here in North Texas. I'm a new mom, a small business owner. I built up a nonprofit called Faith in Texas that brings faith communities together to work for change in the community. And we've won on priorities like payday lending and expanding paid sick time to all Texans. And I'm running because our Texas Republicans here are completely failing us. I mean, we saw this in the ice storm when my husband and I spent 2 nights huddling our baby to keep him warm without power or water. And, you know, we were among the lucky ones. And so as a small business owner, a community leader, a mom, I have too much at stake to continue to stand by while Texas Republicans fail us.
Let me ask you, hold on. Dr. Lydia Bean, Democratic candidate for the 6th Congressional District here in North Texas. Thank you so much for joining us. I really just wanted to start by asking, why are you running?
Thanks for having me, Jack. I'm a small business owner, a new mom, a former teacher, and a community leader here in North Texas. I come from a family of pastors and teachers, and I've really learned the values of public service from my upbringing. I own a small business in the area, and I just have too much at stake to stand by while Texas Republicans continue to fail us. I previously founded a nonprofit called Faith in Texas that builds leadership in faith communities across the lines of race and ethnicity and religion. And together we took on hard fights for change in our communities, including fighting predatory payday lenders, working for paid sick time, getting more funding for our public schools. And now we see this failed leadership all around us, including in the middle of the snowpocalypse when my husband and I spent 2 nights without power, huddling our baby in our arms to keep him warm, while Ted Cruz jetted off to Cancun. And, you know, I just have too much at stake here as a new mom, as a small business owner in the area, to continue to stand by while Texas Republicans keep failing us.
Why do you think you are better than the 22 other candidates? There are 11 Republicans, 10 Democrats, 1 independent, and 1 libertarian running. A lot of people, a crowded field. So why do you think you are best for people to vote for?
Well, look, I'm a proven fighter. If there's one thing we've learned from the last year is that North Texas needs and deserves a real fighter working for us in Congress. And I have a real track record of winning change, of bringing people together across the lines that divide us as a country and working for change in the community, including taking on bullies, fighting payday lenders, working for middle-class families and making the economy work for middle-class families again. I actually have a track record on those things. I'm a proven champion for our communities. And that's why I'm the only candidate out of the 23 who has the support of organized labor, including the AFL-CIO.
So if you are to win, what are your top priorities?
As a small business owner, my top priority is going to get folks back to work safely, reopening the economy safely. We saw how not to do that recently when Governor Abbott dropped the mask mandate way too early. I mean, as a small business owner, I was on the other end of that, scrambling to make sure that we could keep our workers and the public safe without the mask mandate, which is, you know, example of a common sense policy that helps us reopen safely and operate safely in the middle of a pandemic. I'll also work for paid sick time, which is just a common sense policy I've helped pass here in Texas that we need at the federal level too, that allows people to quarantine and stay home when they get sick without losing a paycheck and having their lights turned off. That's the kind of common sense policy that allows us to reopen safely without, you know, sacrificing lives or livelihoods. Number 2, as a former teacher, I put a lot of priority on making sure all students have a path to success, whether that's affordable college or a high quality technical training program that leads to a good paying job. So I'll work with President Biden to make sure we're investing in our community colleges and our trade programs so that everyone has a path to success. And then finally, healthcare. This is something that's very important to me because, like so many Americans, I lost a family member to COVID-19. My Aunt Kathy died of COVID-19 last year. And the reason she was so vulnerable to the disease was because she had survived stage 4 colon cancer. And the reason her cancer had progressed to that stage is she had to go without health insurance towards the end of her life. She couldn't afford to go see a doctor. And so a very preventable, easily treatable disease, if you catch it early stage, developed really far. And that's just wrong. There's so many Texans who have stories just like mine, and we have the power to change it. So I want to build on the Affordable Care Act to make sure everyone is able to go see a doctor when they're sick. Everyone has affordable and accessible health care and healthcare coverage. And that's what I'm going to work on if you send me to Congress.
Sorry to hear about your aunt, but wanted to ask you, just following up on the healthcare. So, what is your prescription when you say expanding the Affordable Care Act? What exactly does that mean? Are we talking about single payer? Are we talking about expanding Medicaid? What exactly are you thinking?
I do support expanding Medicaid at the state level. I've worked as a community leader to advocate for the Texas legislature and the governor to expand Medicaid. And in Congress, I'll continue to advocate for the state of Texas to expand Medicaid. But in Congress, I'm focused on creating a public option. I think this is the smartest way forward for us to build on the Affordable Care Act and create more competition, lower costs. As a small business owner, I know firsthand that one of the barriers to people starting their own business is the cost of healthcare for yourself and your first few employees, because small businesses can't negotiate down the prices like big businesses can. So our prices are just astronomical. And a public option, it's the right thing to do. It's also good business. It helps boost our economy by unlocking entrepreneurs like myself to start their own business. So it's good for people, it's good for the economy. And I think that plus allowing the government to negotiate down the price of drugs, because prescription drug prices are just out of control.
You brought up COVID, and I'm wondering what your thought is. How would you have voted for the relief bill that was ultimately passed by both the House and the Senate? Some people say, opponents say it was not enough really went to actual COVID relief. It was a lot on other things as well.
Yeah, so I support the American Rescue Plan. I think this is going to be a great benefit to help our economy recover and help people recover. As a small business owner, I like to see that there's a lot of help for our small businesses, because it's been a really hard time for small businesses to keep their doors open. And if we want to see those small businesses make it through on the other side, that relief is an essential lifeline. Also for people, I mean, those stimulus checks are going to help people be able to pay their rent, to make it through, to keep spending money, to help our economy recover. That's essential. And I'm excited to see these big, bold investments in public schools, so we can make sure, as a former teacher, come from a family of public school teachers, those investments or education are essential to help our public schools help kids who, have lost learning, in the middle of the pandemic, help them get back on track, recover that learning. It's just essential from top to bottom. And I would note that all my Republican opponents, it seems like they would have voted against it. Not a single Texas Republican supported the American Rescue Plan. And that's just wrong. Texans want the rescue plan, they support it. And if you go into Congress, I will support Texans and, vote for common sense things like that help us here in Texas.
President Biden has recently announced that he favors increasing the income tax, taxes, federal taxes on corporations and on wealthy Americans. Where are you on that issue?
Well, look, I mean, during the Trump administration, we saw Trump Republicans make irresponsible tax cuts, tax expenditures. You have to pay for them. There's no free lunch. They have to come in cuts to public services. Whenever you cut some billionaires' taxes, that means cuts to public services. And if we want to have the ability to fund middle-class priorities like education and healthcare, we have to drop the Trump tax cuts. There's just no way around it. And the burden needs to go on the folks that can most pay. Billionaires, people with extremely high incomes, that's where we need to focus. And that allows us to have relief for the folks who need it, the middle class, small business owners. That's I mean, no one likes paying taxes, but they're the cost of all the services that we count on. They're the cost of getting us out of this mess. And the fact is, the Trump tax cuts were irresponsible to begin with. We couldn't afford them. You just can't give away tax expenditures that we don't have. We have to be responsible.
Wanted to ask you about another issue, certainly making national headlines and headlines here in Texas, and that is the surge in migrants at the southern border. What do you make of this situation, and what do you think needs to be done about it?
The most important thing to keep in mind here is that people are fleeing violence in their home countries. And when people send, particularly children unaccompanied, thinking of my 10-month-old son, Micah, I think of what could compel me to send him alone or send an older child alone to a new country. And I think of the fear of violence that it would take for me to take that step. And so we need to understand that people are fleeing desperate situations. And under US law and international law, we have an obligation to consider their case for asylum and consider, whether they are owed shelter, and we owe them due process, and we owe them humane conditions while we go through that due process. So that's the bottom line, is that we need to be humane and we need to be responsible with folks who are fleeing violence in their home countries. I've worked, for immigration reform and for refugees for over 10 years. In fact, I actually led a delegation of faith leaders to the border when there was a previous upsurge in young people fleeing violence in their home countries. We looked at the places where they were being held, and to really work to make sure they're being held humanely. But the key thing is, the reason we're in this mess today is because of 4 years of failed policies where cruelty was not just a byproduct, it was the whole point. That Trump administration worked to be as cruel, as spectacularly unkind and demonize migrants and people fleeing violence as he could possibly be. And it's going to take us a while to turn the corner on those failed policies and move to something that's actually respecting the rule of law, respecting human rights. I'm going to hold Biden accountable to make sure we get there as quickly as possible. But you don't just turn that big machinery overnight, and that's the struggle we're in today.
And you're referring to the photos of the conditions in the Border Patrol facilities?
Yes. And I've myself toured those facilities, and it just underlines the fact that, especially when we're talking about children don't belong in institutional environments. They need to be with a sponsoring family. If they have any extended family in the United States, they need to be placed with that family while they work through the asylum process. Because, you can't have, when I toured facilities, we heard stories about, a 3-year-old changing a 2-year-old's diapers. We can't have that. We need to have kids along with families.
Wanted to ask you also about H.R. 1, which passed the House. Voting and elections are certainly now a very big topic here in Texas, but nationally. And if you were to be a member of Congress, how would you have voted on that?
Yeah, I support efforts to make voting easier, to make to make sure that we all have the same right to vote no matter where we live. We've seen an upsurge in Republicans attacking the right to vote in Texas and in Georgia. And the way we combat that is we have a uniform set of standards, because our right to vote is sacred. As US citizens, we have this right, and it should be the same right wherever we live. It shouldn't vary based on our zip code. And what we're seeing is that Republicans realize that their policies are unpopular, that their leadership is failing, and people see that. And so instead of turning the ship around, being the champions that our communities need, moving for policies that actually help people, they're just trying to make it harder to vote. And in Congress, I'll be a champion for everyone's vote in this area in North Texas. Even if they didn't vote for me, I'll make sure we all have access to the ballot, and I'll make sure that our right to vote is sacred first and foremost.
2 other issues, if I may, real quick, and I appreciate your time, and that is, after we saw the mass shootings, there have been increased calls for more restrictions on gun sales. Where are you on this issue?
So gun safety isn't complicated. There are bipartisan policies that vast majority of Americans support, Democrat and Republican. And law-abiding gun owners understand that it's possible to have gun safety to stop mass shootings from becoming a new normal. One of the bad things about coming back to the pandemic is we go back to this normal of just new mass shootings happening every month. We can't go back to this. I don't want my son to go into schools and learn how to do active shooter drills. That's really the bottom line for me. That reality of kids who think that's normal to train for mass shootings in their schools. I've seen it, from my young adulthood on, and I don't want to see this go into my child's life. I don't want him to live this reality. So things like making sure we close loopholes, we close, you have universal background checks. Those are things we can all agree on, and they would stop a lot of mass shootings. And we can do those. The only thing standing in our way is NRA-backed politicians who are in the pockets of the gun lobby. Folks who want to sell more guns, who want to stir up hate and fear and sell more guns. And they have bought themselves some politicians who are blocking progress on something that is really a bipartisan value for all Americans.
And wanted to ask you also about police reform. There's been a lot of discussion on this issue as far as training and transparency, but also on eliminating qualified immunity for police officers so that they could be sued directly for their actions. Where are you on these issues?
Yeah, I support reforming qualified immunity. I think I've worked
Does
on
that
this.
mean eliminating it?
Yes, yes. Because obviously, if people something happens in the course of doing their duties and they're being responsible, no, they shouldn't be sued individually. But you look at this recent case of Chauvin and his behavior. What you have is police who have a long rap sheet of complaints, who have multiple cases of brutality, and they should be held accountable as individuals. And I also, I have a long history of working on police accountability and criminal justice reform too. This is something that's important to me personally, because I first got involved in Texas politics when I was a teenager, because there was a drug sting in my hometown, little town in the Panhandle called Tulia, where an undercover agent invented cases and accused 46 people, almost all of them Black, of selling drugs. And he fabricated the cases and invented them, targeting the Black community. And I spent the next 5 years of my life organizing with the defendants' families to get the drug sting overturned and make sure they got due process. And we were ultimately able to change Texas law to raise the standards for undercover police work. And so, it's plain to me that it's really important for us to come together to hold the system accountable, because otherwise we don't all enjoy the same, equal protection under a law that our Constitution enshrines. And that's going to be something I fight for in Congress.
Dr. Lydia Bean, thank you so much. Democratic candidate for the 6th Congressional District. Thank you.
Thank you.